A year ago, the development side of my IT organization was 3 people. Today, if I use the word developer loosely, it's closer to 900. Nobody got hired. And I need to correct that headline before we go any further. 900 people did not suddenly become professional software engineers. They did, however, gain access to tools that can produce scripts, formulas, automations, integrations, sometimes agents. All those can take actions inside our business systems, just like my existing 3 professional DevOps team does now. That is the real change. Software making capability escaped the software team. I've spent decades in IT leadership with a responsibility for both delivery and security. I'm not an AI researcher. I'm not selling a platform. I'm simply describing what the change looks like from the seat that has to enable the work, protect the environment, and answer for the outcome. The question is not whether ordinary employees should be trusted with technology. They already are. The question is whether leadership built a safe path before distributing a new kind of power tool. In too many organizations, the answer is no. This is no doctrine. Here's what I think we should do about it. The old software boundary was imperfect, but visible. If somebody joined a development team, the organization usually knew about it. There was a manager, a repository, some kind of test environment, a release process, another human who reviewed the work. None of those systems guaranteed quality, but they created places where mistakes could be found before they became everybody's problem. AI changed the entry cost for everyone. A person no longer has to learn a programming language before producing something executable. They can describe the result they want and receive code that looks finished. They can connect a model to files, email, browser, database, or any business application. They can turn a personal shortcut into a repeatable process. All of those actions can be extremely useful, but this means that the old signals that used to work for identifying where software is being created are no longer effective. A finance analyst can build a reconciliation workflow. A salesperson can create a whole lead research assistant. Even a warehouse supervisor can connect a spreadsheet to an operational system. The job title stays the same while the blast radius changes. This is not a story about bad employees. Most people are solving the problem in front of them with the tools available. If the sanctioned path is slow, confusing, or non-existent, they will create their own local path, one they perceive as more efficient. That is a rational behavior inside the incentives leadership created within the organization. The governance failure is allowing that local success to become a shared infrastructure without a change in process ownership, review, identity, or support. An experiment is not a product merely because it worked twice. The picture I keep coming back to is a fall festival corn maze at night, something you might see around Halloween. Leadership designed this maze. We chose where the walls went, which paths were lit, and which exits were marked. The maze is our system, the collection of data, permissions, vendors, and informal workflows that make a company run. It's pitch black in there, so to help people find their way through this dry tinderbox of a field, we stood at the entrance and handed out lit torches. Except the torch isn't just AI. The torch is AI connected to authority, the power to take a high impact. And as we handed them over, we just said, use your judgment, be careful. Now look, off in the distance, there are already multiple little orange glows of fire starting up. That is not because our people are foolish. They're using fire because it's useful. It lights their path, and they are trying to get their jobs done. The fires are happening because we didn't build the environment to handle the tool we distributed. A policy that says be responsible sets an expectation, but it does not light the path. It does not narrow the tool, and it does not stop a disaster. That part is our job. IT has seen uncontrolled tools before. Spreadsheets, desktop databases, file sharing services, browser extensions, low-code platforms. We survived them all. So why treat this differently? Not because AI is magic, but because 3 ordinary properties combine in a new way. First, Generated output can look complete before it has been understood. The syntax may be clean, the interface may work, the pre-built happy path may pass the creator's personal test. That visual finish can hide missing tests, invented assumptions, unsafe defaults, or a dependency nobody even reviewed. Second, an agent can be connected to tools that act. But the inherited version of this episode said that an agent was simply one that inherited all the user's rights. Well, that's too absolute. The real authority depends on implementation. Which tools are exposed? What function those tools provide? Which identity and credentials are used? What scopes downstream systems enforce? And whether a human must approve the action. That small distinction matters because it gives us somewhere to intervene, a pause in the action or process. OWASP, the Open Worldwide Application Security Project, calls the failure pattern excessive agency, too much functionality, too much permission, or too much autonomy. An email summary assistant does not need a send function. A reporting assistant does not need write access to source databases. A social post drafting tool does not need the ability to publish without a separate human action. Third, automation changes speed and repetition. A human mistake may happen once. Copied workflow can repeat the same mistake every hour, every day, across many accounts, long after the person who built it has moved on. The dangerous step is not always the first experiment. It's the promotion nobody noticed. One person builds it, a teammate copies it, a department starts to depend on it, and suddenly a personal shortcut is a production infrastructure component. No owner was assigned, no threat model was written, no rollback was ever tested. No one knows which credential will fail when the original employee changes his job. That is the governance gap. I want to put evidence behind the risk, but I also want to be honest about what the evidence can and cannot prove. Veracode's 2025 GenAI Code Security Report tested more than 100 language models across 80 constrained code completion tasks. These tasks covered 4 programming languages and 4 known vulnerability types. Across that test set, 45% of the generated completions contained a detectable security flaw. Newer and larger models did not perform significantly better in that same experiment. That does not mean 45% of AI-generated code in the world is vulnerable. These were deliberately selected security-relevant tasks evaluated with the vendor's own static analysis product. What it does show is narrower and still important. Code that compiles and looks plausible cannot be assumed secure, and model improvement alone did not remove that review requirement. GitClear's 2025 vendor study analyzed 211 million change lines across repositories from 2020 to 2024. It reported that lines classified as copied or cloned rose from 8.3% in 2021 up to 12.3% in 2024, while refactored or moved lines fell from 25% under 10%. That is observational vendor research. Doesn't prove that AI caused every change. It's a signal worth testing in your own environments, not a universal law. IBM and the Ponemon Institute looked at 600 organizations that had experienced data breaches. In that breach sample, 63% either lacked an AI governance policy or were still developing one. 1 in 5 reported a breach due to shadow AI. Organizations with high shadow AI had on average $670,000 more in breach cost than organizations with low or no shadow AI. Again, the denominator matters. This is a study of breached organizations, not a survey proving that 1 in 5 companies everywhere will suffer a shadow AI breach. Now the counterweight. Google's 2025 DORA research, that's DevOps Research and Assessment, drew on nearly 5,000 technology professionals. It found positive relationships between AI adoption, software delivery throughput, and product performance. It also found a negative relationship with delivery stability. DORA's useful phrase is that AI is an amplifier, Strong internal platforms, automated testing, version control, and fast feedback help to convert speed into value. That same amplifying effect also causes a weak system to turn that same speed into instability. That's the better conclusion than either AI is dangerous or AI makes everybody productive. It amplifies the operating system around it. If the risk is real, why not ban the tools? Sometimes a temporary pause is justified. If you can't identify the data involved, control the identity, observe those actions, or stop the workflow altogether, pausing a high-impact deployment is a responsible thing to do. But a blanket ban is usually an incomplete operating model. It treats demand as disobedience instead of information you can use. People adopt those tools because they want to remove friction. A finance team wants to close a process that takes hours instead of taking days on end. A support team wants to find an answer without searching through 6 different systems. A developer wants to understand an unfamiliar code base and maybe get it completed before lunch. Those are legitimate needs. And DORA's evidence matters here. There can be real throughput and product benefits. The goal is not to freeze an organization until every risk disappears. The goal is to make the approved path easier than the shadow path and increase the controls as those actions become harder to reverse. Think of a construction site. Power tools increase both output and injury potential. The answer is not a memo telling everybody to swing a hammer forever when nail guns are readily available. It is training, guardrails, maintenance, appropriate equipment, and clear authority over who operates what. Governance should preserve the advantage while bounding the blast radius. Here's the starter set I would put in place. Instead of that dark cornfield maze, build 6 gates on a paved road. They're not a complete AI governance program in and of themselves, but I'll be naming some of the missing parts in a minute. But these are a good set of first operating controls that make local experimentation visible and make promotion intentional. You cannot govern what you cannot see. Build an inventory of approved and unapproved tools, connected data, owners, business purpose, and action capabilities. Do not turn discovery of a created tool into a punishment campaign. If the first person who admits to using an unsanctioned tool gets disciplined, the rest of the inventory will suddenly become fiction. Use gateway logs, identity subscriptions, procurement, technology expenses, and support signals where lawful and appropriate, then give people a safe way to declare those experiments. The output is not just a list of product names. It's a map of capability and exposure. Give people an improved way to solve common problems. That may be an enterprise assistant, a controlled deployment environment, a reviewed automation platform, or a small set of sanctioned models and connectors. The paved path needs clear data rules, logging, support, cost visibility, and an owner. It has to be usable. If approval takes 8 weeks and the shadow tool takes 8 minutes, the policy you created has already made its choice. Don't hide authority inside a shared account or an employee's long-lived credentials. Use a distinct service or workload identity where the platform supports it. Give it the minimum tools, functions, data, and duration it needs. Read-only is a useful starting point, not a permanent rule. Some valuable workflows must write. The question is whether the write is bounded, attributable, reversible, and appropriate to the risk. High-impact actions, like sending externally, deleting records, committing money, changing access, publishing, or modifying production, should require much stronger authorization and often a human approval at the point of action. Approval also has to be meaningful. A button labeled Approve is not a control if the reviewer cannot see the proposed action, the target, the data involved, and the expected effect. Give the reviewer enough context to make the decision and preserve the decision with the action receipt. Keep them together. If the action is urgent enough to bypass review, define that emergency path well in advance and audit it afterwards. Determine and assign action classes, sometimes called tiers. Class 1 is read, summarize, compare, or draft with low sensitivity data. Class 2 would create a reversible internal change with review. Class 3 affects customers, money, access, public content, regulated data, or even production systems. The control friction should scale with consequence. A meeting summary should be just that, a meeting summary. It should be a draft. It shouldn't need the same extensive review criteria as a payment workflow. And just because somebody came up with something and made it a nice polished demo, it should not automatically skip the controls just because the builder who built it was impressive. Before an experiment becomes a team tool, require a small evidence packet. Owner, purpose, approved inputs, prohibited actions, test cases, failure behavior, rollback, logging, and human decision points. Train people on the parts that change outcomes, like data handling, source checking, permissions, boundaries, prompt injections, output review, and when to stop. Natural AI champions can help, but enthusiasm is not a substitute for accountable ownership. Every supported workflow needs success measures and risk signals. Did it save time? Did error rates change? How often did humans reject the output? What did it cost? Which permissions were actually used? Did a model or upstream data source change? Need to set a review date. Remove unused tools and credentials. Retire workflows that no longer have an owner or defensible benefit. Use a real framework to organize the broader system. NIST AI Research Management Framework from the National Institute of Standards and Technology is voluntary and structures work around govern, map, measure, and manage across the lifecycle. ISO IEC 42001 describes an AI management system built around continual improvement. Neither is a magical checklist. They provide the structure. Your organization still has to implement controls and produce evidence. Let me make the gates concrete. Suppose an analyst builds an assistant that reads a weekly spreadsheet and drafts an exception report. At the personal experiment stage, he used synthetic or approved low sensitivity data. The tool can read the sample and draft a report. It can't send, it can't upload, change records, or connect to production systems. The analyst owns the experiment and records what success means. The results look useful, so then his team wants it. That's the first promotion event. Now a second person reviews the logic. The team actually names an owner, confirms the data source, defines the expected results, tests false positives and false negatives, and decides what happens when the source is missing or malformed. Access moves from a personal credential to an actual scoped identity. Output still stays draft only. Then another department gets wind of this and looks at it and says, we want that same workflow. That is not merely another copy. It is a second promotion event. The workflow now has broader data exposure, more users, and a support expectation. Someone must decide whether to build a shared service or keep a separate bounded instance, or stop. Security, privacy, legal, records, and other procurement may need to enter the discussion depending on the data and the action that the process is taking. If the team eventually wants the assistant to update a system of record, that is a totally new action class. A successful drafting workflow has not earned right authority just by the momentum that it carried with it. It needs bounded functions, test evidence, transaction logging, an approval role, a rollback path, monitoring, and an incident owner. This is the principle. Every increase in audience, data sensitivity, authority, or irreversibility is a promotion event. Do not make every experiment complete a whole enterprise-level paperwork gamut. But don't let useful experiments cross the promotion events invisibly. That is how you keep the paved road open without pretending every useful shortcut is full-blown infrastructure. At each promotion event, I want 8 plain answers. Who owns it? Who can use it? What data can enter? What systems can reach it? What actions can take? How will we know when it failed? How do we stop or reverse it? And when do we review it again? If the team cannot answer those questions, the workflow can remain an experiment while the answers are being built. That's not punishment. It is an honest statement of maturity. And the answer should live next to the workflow, not in a presentation that disappears after approval. The operating contract, test evidence, the decision, and current owner need to travel together. When the tool, model, data, permission, or use case changes, the contract is no longer assumed current. It's pretty much invalidated. That change triggers review proportional to the new risk involved. This is how governance becomes an operating habit instead of a committee event. The 6 gates are a starter operating set. They're not the whole program. A mature system also needs data governance, vendor procurement review, privacy and legal analysis, model and output evaluation, secure development practices, incident response, business continuity, records retention, change management, and retirement. The whole gamut. It needs executive ownership and funding. It needs a way for employees to challenge a bad decision. It needs metrics that can show when control costs more than the risk it reduces. And it needs humility. Some of the spreadsheet helpers are just spreadsheet helpers. If governance treats every formula like a regulated production system, people will just route around governance. If leadership treats every polished agent demo like it's a production product, the company will accumulate invisible, potentially unstable, or dangerous infrastructure. The useful line is not AI versus not AI. The useful line is consequence, authority, exposure, and reversibility. The headline of my video says, my development team grew by 3 to 900. The more accurate version is that software making capability spread to 900 people while the operating model still assumed to live with 3. That gap is the work. Don't blame the people using a torch. Leadership built that dark maze. Light the path. Make the safe route convenient. Give every supported workflow an owner. Bound the identity and the action together. Require evidence at promotion points. Measure whether the thing creates value, and retire it when it does not. And when the action can affect customers, money, access, public content, sensitive data, or production, keep a human decision where it matters. No doctrine, just a field report from the people responsible for what happens after the demo. Hey, if this is useful, share it with whoever owns the maze where you work.